Commerce Alive Today presents
Waldbaum's. Waldbaum's had its start in 1904, when Israel Waldbaum, an immigrant from Austria, began selling butter and eggs at 911 DeKalb Street in Brooklyn. People used to stand three abreast to get into that little store, his widow recalled in 1967. By 1938 there was a second Waldbaum's in Brooklyn's Coney Island section. In that year George and Ernest Brown, identical twins working as stock boys, were promoted to checkers. It was unheard of then for a colored checker to be in a white neighborhood, Ernest Brown said 3 decades later. It was even unheard of for a colored checker to be in a colored neighborhood. Both Browns later became store managers and, eventually, Waldbaum vice presidents. By the time Izzy Waldheim died in 1947 or 1948 at age 55, there were 6 or 7 stores, all in Brooklyn. His son, Ira, left his studies at New York University to run the 2 appetizer stores and subsequently became president of the chain. The first Waldbaum supermarket was opened in 1951 in Flushing, Queens. Net retail sales reached $55.2 million in 1960 and net income amounted to $660,000. The following year Waldbaum's went public by selling shares of common stock, mostly for the company's own account, at $14 a share, but the Waldbaum family retained 81% of the stock. At the time the company and its subsidiaries were operating 35 supermarkets in Brooklyn, Queens, and adjacent Nassau County, Long Island. It was also conducting wholesale food operations. Waldbaum's acquired Michael's Fair Mart Food Stores Incorporated, a 13-unit chain with annual sales of more than $15 million, in 1962 for cash and stock. The company moved its headquarters from Brooklyn to Garden City, Long Island, in 1964 and the following year was operating 60 stores, including units in the borough of Staten Island and in Westchester County, north of New York City. Sales reached $197.4 million and net income totaled $2 million in 1967. By 1971 there were Waldbaum's in all of the New York City boroughs except Manhattan, in Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island, in 4 counties north of the city, and in northern New Jersey. Manhattan remained unrepresented in the Waldbaum empire because of an unsuccessful 8-month venture in the early 1960s during which, Ira Waldbaum later said, "I heard people asking for a banana, an apple, a lamb chop. I knew that kind of volume wouldn't work for us, so I got out." New Jersey did not work out either, in part because the company could not compete on price with ShopRite and Pathmark. After only 3 years, Waldbaum's pulled out of the state in 1971. Julia Waldbaum, Izzy's widow, remained active in management. Bearing the title of company secretary, she made surprise inspections of about 30 stores a month as self-appointed watchdog of the supermarket chain. Many of the customers recognized her because her picture appeared on almost all of the 400 food products sold under the Waldbaum label. "Although they left me off the dog food and the bathroom tissue," she told a reporter in a tone hinting at disappointment. To the consternation of her family, she kept her telephone number listed in the book. "I like to have the customers to call me," she said, "because a lot of them think Julia Waldbaum is an imaginary person like Betty Crocker." She continued her inspections to an advanced age and died in 1996 at the age of 99. In 1969 Waldbaum's acquired Holyoke Food Mart Incorporated, a privately held chain of 14 supermarkets in Connecticut and western Massachusetts with annual sales of $38 million. Most of these outlets continued to bear the Food Mart rather than Waldbaum name. Company sales quadrupled between 1960 and 1968, a period during which annual earnings declined only in 1965, when the company dropped trading stamps to reduce costs. Waldbaum's introduced a line of private label foods and non-food items in 1964. By the end of the decade the company was deriving about 20% of its grocery revenues from private label merchandising. The establishment of stores as large as 30,000 square feet enabled Waldbaum's to stock a variety of non-food merchandise, such as cosmetics, clothing, housewares, books, and magazines. 2 stores had pharmacies. Waldbaum's also was participating in discount food merchandising through the operation of leased departments in 6 large discount stores on Long Island. These departments did not carry the Waldbaum name. Waldbaum's moved its headquarters and distribution center farther east in 1974, to Central Islip, Long Island. Almost half of the 118 units that year were in Brooklyn and Queens. During 1978 to 1979, the company bought 10 former Pantry Price/Hill stores from the bankrupt food fair chain, bringing the total number of outlets to 138, compared with 80 in 1970. Net sales reached $1.1 billion in the last year of the decade, compared with $281 million in 1969, and net income was $7.8 million, compared with $2.7 million in 1969. By the end of the 1970s, Waldbaum's was the second largest company in sales on Long Island and the third largest employer. The Waldbaum's of the 1970s continued to gear its merchandising and advertising to its longtime base, the upper-middle-income Jewish customer. Many sources considered it to be the best appetizer and deli operation in the East. Its deli cases were being re-merchandised to take advantage of the Italian, Greek, and Spanish trade in marketing areas where the population was not primarily Jewish. Waldbaum seemed to be just as successful catering to these ethnic groups. Adhering to his mother's habits, Ira Waldbaum spent a great deal of time on the road, often visiting 10 stores a day. At approximately 8:15 a.m. on August 2, 1978, a fire was reported at the store in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. Workers who were in the store during renovations reported a fire near the compressor room. After several more calls, including a nearby pulled street box, several fire companies had been dispatched to the scene. As a result of the renovations, the fire was able to quickly spread to the mezzanine and cockloft areas. Per department policies at the time, firefighters were ordered to the roof to begin venting the building. After a determination made by the battalion chief on scene that day, a second alarm was ordered and the fire was declared as out of control. At 9:02 a.m., as firefighters were on the roof with fire showing in sections, a large portion suddenly collapsed, sending 12 firefighters into the fully involved building. In the end, 6 firefighters had died in the fire and over 30 injured. Investigators initially determined that the fire was deliberately set and arrested a 21-year-old neighborhood man named Eric Jackson Knight, who was charged with arson and 6 counts of murder for the loss of the firefighters. Jackson Knight was convicted based on testimony from a Rikers Island inmate at the facility during the time Jackson Knight was being held there. He also confessed to setting the fire with accomplices. But the methods he claimed to use were inconsistent with the characteristics of the fire and that he actually was describing another fire he had set earlier. Nonetheless, the jury voted to convict him and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison. The verdict was affirmed on appeal in 1985 after Jackson Knight motioned for a dismissal. However, as a civil suit filed by the families of the fallen firefighters was about to be drawn up in 1986, evidence emerged that upon further review the fire was caused by an electrical failure and that the prosecution withheld information from the defense team. In 1988, a new trial was ordered and in 1994 the jury returned an acquittal. In 1983, Waldbaum's opened its first Megamart, a 55,000-square-foot store in Greenfield, Massachusetts. This was a significant departure because the extra space was filled with general merchandise goods that the chain had generally avoided, even though non-food items yielded a higher profit margin. Another Megamart was the remodeled, 52,000-square-foot outlet in Valesgate, New York, which carried 4 to 5 times the amount of general merchandise it did previously, including everything from cosmetics to a large selection of boxed toys. The pace of movement toward megastores was a point of contention between the conservative Ira Waldbaum on one hand and his impatient to expand sons and son-in-law Aaron Malinsky, the company's executive vice president, on the other. Technology was another sticking point. It's hard to get the older people to use the computer data instead of just shooting from the hip, Martin Waldbaum told a reporter. They are still in the butter and eggs philosophy. Now the nation's 12th largest supermarket chain, Waldbaum's earned a record $17.1 million on $1.76 billion in sales during 1985, its last year of independent operation. The enterprise was not without its problems, however. Profits had fallen in both 1983 and 1984. In the latter year, Waldbaum's, along with 3 other supermarket chains, pleaded no contest to a charge of conspiracy to fix prices by eliminating double value coupons. It eventually paid $700,000 in fines and distributed $7.5 million worth of redeemable coupons to settle litigation. Early in 1986, a presidential commission charged that Waldbaum's and other supermarket chains were involved with organized crime and paying for various operating services. In 1986, Waldbaum's was sold to the A&P Supermarkets for $50 a share, or $287.1 million. The Waldbaum family's stake in the company was more than 60% at this time. The family subsequently suffered embarrassment because Robert Chessman, a stockbroker who heard about the pending deal through his son-in-law Ira Waldbaum, reaped profits of $250,000 in trades based on this information, part of which he shared with the son-in-law. Chessman was convicted on 10 counts of insider trading. Under A&P, Waldbaum's experienced a slide in market share in both New York City and Long Island, its New England stores having been turned over to Waldbaum's Food Mart, another A&P subsidiary. Despite initial promises that the chain would continue to be run as an independent unit, Ira Waldbaum was soon gone. Malinsky, who succeeded as president, eventually departed to run another A&P chain, leaving Ira's son Arthur the only family member remaining in management. Many other key employees also left and the chain's low prices and ethnic merchandising savvy evaporated. In 1993, one food broker described Waldbaum under A&P as a typical story of taking a racehorse and turning it into a camel. While there was some off-the-cuff disorganized thinking at Waldbaum before A&P bought it, at least it had some spice. 3 years later, a supermarket competitor echoed the assessment that Waldbaum had lost its focus on ethnic foods. Waldbaum's also was being faulted on other grounds. According to a New York state agency, the company failed 47% of its store inspections for sanitation in 1990, compared with an average of 26% for 9 other major supermarket chains. During one inspection of a Brooklyn store, 2 dead mice were found on the packaged goods shelves. And in 1994, a federal court awarded 224 Waldbaum's employees more than $1.8 million in back wages due to violations of record-keeping and overtime labor laws. Waldbaum's, which dealt with 16 unions, had other labor problems in the 1990s. In 1992, a Teamsters local, representing the company's warehouse workers, urged a consumer boycott to win a contract. A union official said Waldbaum's pay scales were lower than other supermarket chains in the region because of sweetheart deals cut by an organized crime figure eventually forced to quit his Teamsters job by a court-appointed investigator. Subsequently hired by Waldbaum's as a labor contractor, this man lost his contract after Waldbaum's workers complained to federal authorities and the media. He was later found shot to death. A&P attempted to improve Waldbaum's operations by relinquishing its responsibility for the chain's buying in 1995. This allowed Waldbaum's to establish better relations with its vendors. And A&P continued Waldbaum's policy of gradually replacing some of the older, smaller stores with superstores, such as the 52,000 square foot Levittown unit, which included 3 aisles of health and beauty aids, a pharmacy, a flower shop, a bakery, a custom butcher, and a fresh fish counter. In 1991, a 60,000 square foot Waldbaum's had opened in the South Bronx, only a few blocks from Yankee Stadium. A&P also provided Waldbaum's with capital to expand and upgrade its computer systems, thereby enabling the chain to track inventory and sales more swiftly. A 1994 survey found that Waldbaum's 27 stores in New York City had 12% of the city's market share in its field and ranked first in the borough of Queens. It retained its #1 standing on Long Island. But being hard-pressed by King Cullen and Pathmark, discounters, convenience stores, and drugstores. They have a higher than average proportion of different types of foods that would appeal to the Jewish market. Waldbaum's was catering heavily to communities with large Italian-American populations. Waldbaum's also was marketing A&P's private label, sold under the America's Choice and Master Choice brands, which drag on A&P's profits in 1996. For the next 14 years, A&P continued to mismanage Waldbaum's, investing little in these stores, resulting in the closing or sale of many Food Mart stores in the New England division. A&P then converted the remaining Waldbaum's Food Mart store into the Super Food Mart banner, and later, to A&P Super Food Mart. The remaining 41 Waldbaum stores existed only in Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and on Long Island. Many Waldbaum's are former A&P stores. On August 13, 2010, A&P announced that it would close 25 stores as the parent of Waldbaum's began the implementation and execution phase of its comprehensive turnaround. These stores closed in October 2010, including stores in Centereach and Levittown, Long Island. In February 2011, A&P announced 32 additional store closings, including 3 Long Island Waldbaum's, Farmingdale, Smithtown, and Valley Stream on April 15, 2011. In January 2012, A&P announced half a dozen additional closings on Long Island. The grocery chain said that 6 stores would close in Commack, West Babylon, East Islip, Lake Ronkonkoma, Huntington Station, and Rockville Center. The closures happened in March 2012, as Waldbaum's parent company, A&P Incorporated, emerged from Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. On July 20, 2015, A&P filed for a prepackaged Chapter 11 bankruptcy, following years of financial loss and a struggle to compete with rival grocery chains. The company announced that 3 Waldbaum stores in Carle Place, Riverhead, and Oceanside were set to close. 19 stores were sold to Stop and Shop and Key Food. 5 store locations were purchased by Best Yet Market in November 2015, and 3 locations to Wakefern Food Corporation, owner of the ShopRite food chain.
We're everything you're looking for at Waldbaum.
This week at Waldbaum's, a 1-pound package of M&M's plain or peanut chocolate candies, the official snack food of the Olympics, is only $1.69. And a 1-pound container of Breakstone cottage cheese is only 99 cents. Or you can get 3 6-ounce cans of Friskies Buffet for only 79 cents. This week at Waldbaum's.
We're everything you're looking for in a supermarket and more. Waldbaum.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.